She sold her dead grandmother's gold to pay his school fees. 2 years later, his sister called her not good enough, and he believed it without asking her a single question. He got rich. He got engaged to another woman. He thought the lie was buried. It wasn't. It came back, in front of 300 people, at the exact event meant to celebrate everything he'd built without her. And by the time the room found out the truth, it was already too late for him to fix it. If you've ever been thrown away by someone the moment you stopped being convenient, watch this till the end. This one's for you.
Uzo, I am telling you this as your sister who loves you. This girl will drag you back to the gutter you climbed out of.
Auntie Patience, please. Ifeoma has never asked me for anything.
That is exactly the problem. A woman who asks for nothing today will demand everything tomorrow. You are a man of substance now.
Ifeoma.
I think we should stop seeing each other.
Uzo? Uzo, look at me. What did I do?
A door closes, then only quiet crying and the breath being gathered, steadied. There is a particular kind of forgetting that only wealth can produce. It does not happen with a bang. It happens in installments. A missed phone call here, a shortened visit there, a sentence left unfinished because finishing it would require admitting something the mouth is not yet ready to admit. This is a story about a man who was loved before he was anyone, and about the woman who did the loving quietly, completely, without a single condition attached. It is also a story about what happens to people who mistake cruelty for concern and what happens to the ones they try to erase. If you have ever built someone up with your own 2 hands and then watched them walk into a room you were never invited into, stay with me. This one is for you. Uzoma Nenadi was raised in Diobu, in a face-me-I-face-you compound where privacy was a rumor and every argument, every celebration, every small tragedy belonged to the whole yard whether the yard wanted it or not. His father repaired generators for a living, a trade that kept the family fed but never once ahead. His mother had passed when Uzo was 11, and from that year forward, an aunt 2 doors down took turns feeding him alongside her own children, never making him feel like a burden, though he always privately felt like one anyway. He was a clever boy. Teacher said so. Neighbor said so. But cleverness in Diobu was a currency with no exchange rate. You could be the sharpest boy on the street and still end up selling recharge cards at a roadside kiosk because university fees existed in a universe your father's income could not reach. He scraped through a polytechnic program in business studies, financed by a scholarship he had fought 3 separate bureaucrats to secure, and graduated at 23 into a job market that treated his certificate like a decorative object rather than a key. For 18 months, he hawked applications the way other young men hawked phone accessories, persistently, hopefully, and mostly without result. It was during this stretch, the leanest and most humiliating stretch of his life, that he met Ifeoma. Ifeoma Chukwuma lived on Agre Road, in a household that measured its wealth in effort rather than currency. Her mother sold fabric in bulk lengths at Mile 1 Market. Her father had left when she was 9 and had not been heard from since. A fact the family discussed exactly once, and then never again, the way people bury things too heavy to keep carrying into conversation. She was the eldest of 4, which in practice meant she had been raising siblings since she herself was barely out of childhood. She learned to stretch a small pot of stew across 6 plates. She learned to iron a school uniform by 6 a.m. and still make it to her own classes on time. She learned, most of all, to keep her spine straight in rooms that expected her to apologize simply for occupying space. She met Uzo at a wedding in Woji, where she had gone not as a guest but as an extra hand, helping her aunt manage the small chops table. She was balancing a tray of puff-puff when a young man in a slightly too large blazer stepped aside to let her pass and, in doing so, knocked over a stack of plastic chairs, apologized 3 times, and made her laugh so suddenly that she nearly dropped the tray herself. He found an excuse to talk to her again before the reception ended. She gave him her number reluctantly, the way a person gives something they suspect they will regret giving. She did not regret it. What drew her to him was not his prospects, he had none to speak of, but the particular honesty in the way he spoke about his failures. Most young men she had met performed confidence they did not possess. Uzo simply told her the truth, that he was afraid he would never amount to anything, that he watched his mates get married and build houses while he still borrowed transport fare from his cousin. She found that unbearably rare. A man who could admit fear out loud, she believed, was a man who could also eventually admit love out loud and mean it. They began seeing each other in the unhurried way of two people with no money for the things courtship is supposed to include. Long walks along the waterfront, shared plates of roasted corn, split evenly, always evenly, because Ifeoma insisted on fairness even in small things. Conversations that stretched past midnight over borrowed phone credit, both of them too stubborn to be the one to hang up first. The turning point came when Uzo heard about a certification program in freight and logistics, a 6-month course that industry insiders swore could open doors into the shipping and haulage companies clustered around the port. The tuition was more than his father could conjure in a year of generator repairs. He mentioned it to Ifeoma almost in passing. The way you mention a dream you have already decided is impossible. She did not respond right away. 3 days later, she arrived at his compound with an envelope. Inside, it was money, not a loan. She was careful to specify a gift raised by selling the 2 gold bangles her late grandmother had left her, along with nearly a year of savings from selling boiled groundnuts and sachet water outside a secondary school gate every single afternoon after finishing her own shift at a hair salon. Ifeoma, I cannot take your grandmother's. You can and you will, she said, folding his fingers around the envelope with both of her hands. Pride does not pay tuition, Uzo. Register tomorrow. The deadline does not wait for your conscience to finish arguing with itself. He registered, and while he studied, she doubled down on every hustle available to her. She woke before dawn to prepare akara and pap for sale near bus stop. She took in laundry from 2 neighboring families. She kept the salon job in the afternoons. She slept, by her own later estimate, roughly 4 hours a night for the better part of that year, and she did it without complaint, because in her mind she was not sacrificing for a man. She was investing in a future she had decided, quietly and firmly, to share. There is an old saying that a person who plants in secret should not be surprised when the harvest is claimed by someone who was standing in the open field at the right time. Ifeoma had not yet learned that lesson. She would learn it soon enough. There were nights during that stretch when her body simply refused to cooperate. She remembered one evening in particular, her hands cracked from washing other people's clothes in cold water, her feet swollen from standing all day at the salon, a pot of akara batter still to be prepared before she could even think of sleep. She sat on the low stool outside their room, head in her hands, and for the first time in a long while allowed herself to cry without an audience. Her mother found her there. She did not ask what was wrong. She already knew the shape of it. She simply sat beside her on the cold cement step, took one of Ifeoma's cracked hands into her own, and rubbed a little shea butter into it without a word. You think love is supposed to feel light, her mother finally said, because that is what films and songs tell young people. But love that is worth anything is heavy, my daughter. The question is not whether you feel the weight. The question is whether you are strong enough to still be standing when the weight becomes something else. A house, a business, a child, a name people respect. Everything I have ever built, I built while tired. Do not let tired frighten you out of what is yours to build. Ifeoma never forgot those words. She wrote them years later in the front page of the small notebook where she kept her earliest catering orders. A private reminder tucked away from anyone else's eyes, meant only for the mornings when 4 a.m. felt impossibly far from worth it. The certification worked exactly as Uzo had hoped. He landed a junior clearing and forwarding role at a mid-sized haulage firm near the port. It paid modestly, but it placed him inside rooms where real money moved, where he could watch, listen, and learn the invisible mechanics of an industry most people only saw from the outside. He was diligent. He asked the kind of questions that made older colleagues take him seriously rather than dismiss him. Within 2 years, he had been promoted twice. By the 3rd year, he had scraped together enough capital, some personal savings, some from a cooperative society, and a meaningful portion quietly contributed by Ifeoma from her now growing food business, to start his own small clearing agency. The business was slow in its first 8 months, and then, almost without warning, it was not slow at all. A contract with a mid-tier importer led to 2 more. Word traveled the way it does in tightly networked industries. By his 4th year in business, Uzoma Nadi had an office with his name on the door, 3 staff members, and a bank balance that would have been unthinkable to the boy who once borrowed transport fare from his cousin. Success in Port Harcourt announces itself quickly and loudly. Uzo bought a car, then a better one. He moved out of Diobu into a serviced apartment in JRA. He began to be invited to functions he had once only heard about secondhand, and it was at this exact moment, the moment his name started meaning something, that his sister decided it was finally time to intervene. Patience was Uzo's elder sister by 9 years, married to a man named Ferdinand, who ran a modest pharmaceutical distribution outfit. She had always carried herself like someone auditioning for a status she had not yet been granted, and Uzo's sudden rise gave her for the first time a stage worth performing on. She had met Ifeoma exactly twice, once briefly at a family function, once when she'd stopped by Uzo's old apartment unannounced and found Ifeoma there in a faded wrapper, hair wrapped in a scarf, sorting laundry. Patience had said very little in the moment. She had said a great deal about it afterward to anyone who would listen. Now that her brother had arrived, Patience treated his transformation as a family project requiring immediate correction of past associations. Uzo, she told him one evening, settled into his new leather sofa with the particular comfort of someone who considers a space partly her own achievement. People are already asking about you. Who you keep, who stands beside you at events, this is now part of your image, whether you like it or not. Ifeoma has stood beside me since I had nothing, Auntie Patience. And I am not disputing her heart, Patience said smoothly. I am disputing her fit. A man in your position needs a wife who can walk into a boardroom dinner without anyone whispering. Ifeoma is a good girl. She is simply not built for where you are going. Uzo did not answer that night, but silence in situations like these rarely stays neutral for long. It tends to curdle into agreement if left unchallenged, and Patience, sensing the opening, did not waste time. Within weeks, Patience had orchestrated 3 separate introductions: the daughter of a fuel depot owner, a young woman recently returned from a master's program in Manchester, and a state contractor's niece with a Lagos wardrobe and a practiced laugh. Each introduction came wrapped in a dinner, a subtle staging, an implied comparison Uzo was clearly meant to draw. Simultaneously and far more damagingly, Patience began a quieter operation. It started as questions dressed as concern, dropped into conversations with relatives, wondering aloud how Ifeoma could afford new clothes on a salon salary, hinting she'd been seen with different men near her stall, always careful to frame it as concern rather than accusation. Rumors once released do not travel in straight lines. They gather embellishment the way a rolling object gathers dust. By the time the story circled back to Uzo, filtered through a cousin who had heard it from a family friend, it had acquired specific details Patience had never actually supplied: a name, a car, a hotel, a time of night. Uzo confronted Ifeoma with all of it laid bare, and he confronted her badly, not with shouting, which she might have known how to answer, but with a cold, clinical distance that left no room for defense. She denied it plainly, without theatrics, and then asked the only question that mattered. "Do you believe me, Uzo?" He hesitated. The hesitation lasted perhaps 4 seconds. It was long enough. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said. She did not argue further. She gathered her things, left quietly, and cried only once she was alone in the back of a shared taxi, where no one who knew her could see the particular shape of that grief. Not the loud kind, but the kind that arrives when something you built with your own hands is dismissed as though it were never real at all. In the weeks that followed, Uzo did what people often do when making a decision they refuse to name out loud. He grew distant without explanation. Calls went unanswered for hours, then returned with clipped, businesslike replies. Once she heard laughter in the background of a call he cut short, a woman's laughter, easy and familiar, and he did not call back that night or the next. Ifeoma understood before he ever said the words plainly. She did not make a scene. She did not appeal to patience or beg for an explanation or perform the kind of visible heartbreak that might have satisfied an audience. She simply went quiet in the specific way she had been taught to go quiet her whole life, not numb, but disciplined. The pain filed away to be dealt with later, when there was time for it. Her mother, sensing something without being told the details, sat with her one evening while they sorted rice on a tray, picking out stones in companionable silence. Eventually, she said, without looking up, "A woman who waters her own garden does not need to explain herself to the goats that wander off." It wasn't profound. It was simply her mother offering the exact shape of comfort her daughter needed without demanding to know the wound first. Ifeoma took the food business she had been running informally for years and made it official. She registered it under a name that had been sitting in her mind for months: Nwane Catering, child of my own effort. She opened a business account. She rented a shared commercial kitchen in Rumuola for the afternoon shift, splitting costs with another vendor who used the space each morning. She was exact about everything: presentation, timing, communication, in an industry where lateness and excuses were the norm. If she promised delivery at 5, it arrived at 10 to 5, hot, plated properly, with a handwritten thank you note tucked beside the containers. That reliability became her signature faster than her cooking did, and her cooking was already exceptional. 18 months after the silence that ended things, Nendua Ene Catering had 4 full-time staff and a client list that included 2 churches, a bank branch's monthly luncheons, and a growing string of weddings and naming ceremonies. A regional lifestyle blog ran a short feature on her, complete with a photograph of her standing in her rented kitchen, sleeves rolled, entirely unbothered by the camera. That feature reached the desk of a hospitality entrepreneur named Obina Ferdinand, no relation to Patience's husband, a coincidence Ifeoma would later find almost comical, who ran 2 upscale event venues in the city. He had tasted her jollof at a friend's function, made inquiries, and eventually tracked her down through a mutual client to propose a standing supply partnership for private events at his venues. She walked into that meeting with a portfolio of her work, testimonials from past clients, and a pricing sheet she had built herself over a long weekend. She left with a signed agreement in principle. No one had handed her that opportunity. She had built the reputation that made the opportunity find her, and that distinction mattered to her more than the money itself. It had not all been smooth sailing to get there. There was one wedding early in her dealings with Obina's circle where a generator failure at the venue threatened to spoil an entire afternoon's worth of prepared jollof and grilled fish just 2 hours before 300 guests were due to arrive. A less seasoned vendor might have panicked, made excuses, called ahead to apologize for a disaster not yet certain. Ifeoma did not do that. She sent Blessing to a neighboring hotel with cash in hand and a direct request to rent their kitchen for 4 hours. She personally supervised the transport of half-finished dishes across town in the back of a hired pickup, wrapped in wet towels to hold the heat, while phoning 2 former colleagues from her old salon days to come help with last-minute plating. The food arrived 11 minutes behind schedule, a delay so small that only Ifeoma herself seemed bothered by it, apologizing to the client despite the client insisting there was nothing to apologize for. That single afternoon of quiet, unglamorous crisis management did more for her reputation than 100 easy events could have. The client's extended family ran 3 other businesses across the city. Within 2 months, all 3 had placed orders of their own. Ifeoma never told that story publicly. She never needed to. In an industry that runs on word of mouth, competence that survives a crisis speaks far louder than competence that is never tested at all. Meanwhile, Uzo had become engaged. The woman was Adeeze, daughter of a well-known oil servicing contractor. Precisely the kind of match Patience had been engineering from the start. Adeeze was polished, articulate, entirely comfortable in rooms Ifeoma had once only served food in. She was also, if one paid close attention, more invested in what Uzo represented than in Uzo himself, a fact he suspected but chose, for a long while, not to examine too closely. He told himself this was maturity, that he was finally choosing with his head instead of whatever softer organ had guided him through the lean years. He repeated this to himself often enough that he nearly believed it. Except in the quiet moments, the drive home, the last minutes before sleep, when a smaller, more honest voice asked him whether he had actually chosen anything at all, or simply stopped resisting his sister long enough for the decision to make itself. There was one evening, a few weeks before the formal introduction ceremony, when that quieter voice grew loud enough to stop him mid-motion. He was standing in his dressing room, adjusting the cuffs of a new agbada Patience had commissioned specifically for the occasion, when his phone buzzed with an old photograph a mutual friend had resurfaced from years back. Ifeoma laughing at something off-camera, mid-sentence, unposed, taken outside her family's compound on an afternoon he barely remembered anymore. He sat on the edge of his bed for a long time with that photograph open, his thumb hovering over nothing in particular. He thought about the envelope with her grandmother's bangles inside it. He thought about the sound of her voice on borrowed phone credit at midnight, the particular way she used to say his name when she believed in him more than he believed in himself. He thought about asking her one more time whether any of what he'd heard had ever been true. He did not send the message. He told himself it was too late for that conversation to matter, that reopening it now would only be selfish, a man wanting reassurance rather than actually wanting her back. It was, in truth, a convenient excuse, the kind men build for themselves when they had her. More honest action requires more courage than they currently have available. He put the phone down, finished adjusting his cuffs, and went downstairs to rehearse pleasantries with people who were about to become his in-laws. The engagement was announced with the kind of celebration patients treated as a personal milestone. A venue in grey, a guest list assembled from every social circle she had spent a decade cultivating. Ifeoma heard about it secondhand, the way one hears news that confirms rather than surprises. She sat with the feeling for one evening, allowed herself to feel it fully, and then went back to work the next morning because the events calendar did not pause for anyone's heartbreak. It was through her partnership with Obinna that she received an invitation to the Port Harcourt Trade and Enterprise Gala, an annual gathering where the city's business elite came to be seen, to shake the hands that would become contracts within the month. Obinna's venue group was a sponsor, and Andoa Ane Catering was listed in the printed program as a featured vendor. A small line, her name in print in a room she once would have entered only through the service entrance. She nearly declined. The logistics of the week were tight, but her newest hire, a sharp young woman named Blessing, who had become indispensable within months of joining, refused to let the opportunity pass. "Madam, doors like this do not knock twice," she said. "Go." Ifeoma went. She wore a tailored emerald dress and gold earrings she had bought herself from a jeweler on Abba Road, not the ones her grandmother had left her. Those were long gone, but earrings chosen and paid for entirely on her own terms, which mattered to her more than any inherited jewelry ever could. The venue was one of the city's better hotels, all soft light and the particular hum of people performing prosperity whether or not they fully felt it. She found Obinna near the entrance, exchanged a few words before he was pulled into a cluster of conversation and settled at her assigned table to observe, an old habit from years of working rooms like this one from the margins. She did not expect to see Uzo, and yet there he was across the room, laughing among a group of men in tailored suits, heavier than she remembered in the comfortable way of a man who no longer worried where his next meal was coming from. Beside him stood Patience, resplendent in heavy embroidered lace, working the room with the particular energy of someone performing an evening rather than living inside it. Ifeoma looked at them for a moment, then returned her attention to her own table. She was not hiding. She simply had no interest in whatever shape the night might take if she let herself be pulled toward it. What none of them yet understood was that the evening carried its own plans. Among the guests was a respected logistics consultant named Chidozie Amadi, a longtime associate of Obinna's who had hired Enawanne Catering twice before and considered Ifeoma one of the most reliable vendors he had worked with in 15 years in the industry. He was also, as it happened, a close friend of Patience's husband, Ferdinand. Months earlier, over drinks that had wandered further than either man intended, Ferdinand had confessed something he'd been carrying alone, that his wife had deliberately destroyed her brother's relationship with a decent young woman years earlier, using a rumor manufactured from nothing but her own disapproval. He had discovered it by accident, confronted her, and been met with icy composure. She had done what was necessary, she said, and it was not his concern. Ferdinand had never repeated it to anyone else. Until that drink with Chidozie, when the weight of holding it alone finally became too much. Chidozie had filed the confession away as none of his business. Until that night when Obinna, introducing Chidozie to a cluster of guests, mentioned Ifeoma by name, her roadside beginnings, the painful personal chapter she had quietly overcome to build what she now had. Chidozie looked across the room. He saw Uzo. He saw Patience beside him. And something he had been sitting on for 2 years decided it had sat long enough. He had been asked earlier to say a few words as part of the evening's brief vendor recognition segment. He delivered his prepared remarks cleanly. Then, as the room began settling back into its private conversations, he added something that had not been written down anywhere. "One of the most important things I have learned in 15 years of business," he said, his voice carrying easily across the quieting room, "is to remember who believed in you before belief in you cost nothing. I once knew of a hard-working young woman who was nearly destroyed by a lie, a story invented by someone who decided she wasn't good enough for the life someone else was building. That lie succeeded. It ended something real. And yet tonight, I am looking at that same woman and she has built something extraordinary entirely on her own, without the relationship that was taken from her, without anything but her own character. I think that deserves to be said out loud in a room like this one. He named no one. He didn't need to. The room shifted, the particular ripple of a crowd that knows how to read a statement left deliberately open. Whispers moved table to table. Eyes began traveling, searching, placing. Patience's face went very still, the stillness of someone realizing that what she believed she had buried had in fact learned to stand back up on its own. Uzo heard it from 15 feet away, and he heard it the way a person hears something they have half known for years without ever chasing it to the truth. His eyes moved across the room, almost against his will, and found Ifeoma. She was watching Chidozie, her expression composed, unreadable, the practiced stillness of someone who has spent years learning not to let a room see what moves behind her eyes. Then, as though sensing the weight of his attention, she turned, and across the distance of years, choices, and one very costly silence, their eyes met. He looked away first. Several guests drifted toward Chidozie afterward, some with quiet questions, some with knowing glances exchanged between old friends who had clearly suspected something for years. A woman standing near Patience's circle leaned toward her companion and murmured something that made the companion's eyebrows lift sharply. Ferdinand, standing near the bar, did not look at his wife at all. Patience left the venue 20 minutes later, spine straight, lace immaculate, posture flawless in the way that had always been her armor. But the room had heard what it heard, and rooms in a city like this one carry long memories. Ifeoma did not watch her go. She was mid-conversation with Obinna and two prospective clients, and the conversation was going well, and she made the deliberate choice to remain exactly where she was, letting the rest of the evening unfold without her at its center. Yuzo found her near the exit as the event wound down, staff quietly beginning to clear the room. Ifeoma. Uzo, she answered evenly. I heard what Chidozie said. Did you know he was going to? I barely know the man. I had no idea. He nodded, studied the floor for a moment, then looked back up. The things I believed. The things I let myself believe about you. You were told a lie, she said quietly, without heat. And you chose to believe it because believing it was easier than choosing me, while your sister told you every single day that I wasn't enough. She paused. I understand why. I don't enjoy understanding it. But I do. I should have. Yes, she said simply. You should have. They stood in that silence together for a moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. And there was something genuine underneath the small weight of the word, the sound of a debt he had known. Somewhere he owed. I believe you, she said. I genuinely believe you mean it. She exhaled slowly. But Uzo, I spent a long time questioning myself, grieving something I built with you across years of my life. All of it built on a lie your sister told because she decided I wasn't worthy of the life she'd imagined for you, and you let that be enough. She was wrong. She was wrong about many things. Ifeoma glanced past him, at the last guest filing out, then met his eyes again. But what happens between you and her is between the two of you. I made my peace with all of this a long time ago. I am not going to pick it back up now. He understood what she wasn't saying. He had built a business. He knew, better than most, when a door had closed for good. You've done well for yourself, he said, and the words carried more than a compliment. They carried the weight of a man recognizing, too late, something he had badly underestimated. I had good teachers, she said, something almost like a smile touching her mouth, not aimed at him, but at some private knowledge she owed no one an explanation of. Hardship teaches you almost everything if you let it. She excused herself and walked back toward Obinna's group. He watched her go, that same unhurried, certain walk that had first caught his attention years ago at a wedding in Woji when she was carrying a tray of puff-puff and he was pretending to be a man with somewhere important to be. It had not left her. If anything, it had grown heavier with meaning, the way a river grows heavier the farther it travels from its source. He stood alone longer than was comfortable. Then he found his own way out. Patience returned to her social circles in the weeks that followed and found them subtly rearranged. Certain invitations arrived less promptly. Certain conversations carried a new, careful distance whenever she entered a room. Ferdinand, for his part, began treating her with the quiet reserve of a man who had made peace with what kind of person he'd married and had privately decided how much more of himself he was willing to offer going forward. Whether Patience ever fully reckoned with what she had done, whether she ever named it honestly, even to herself, remained something only she could answer. Uzo's engagement to Adize dissolved quietly 4 months later. She had, in the meantime, found a more advantageous match and pursued it without much visible regret. Uzo, to his own surprise, felt mostly relief. He spent the better part of the following year absorbed in work and emerged from it with slightly rearranged priorities. A little less interested in the performance of success, a little more attentive to what actually sat beneath it. Ifeoma's business kept growing. She signed a proper lease on her own dedicated kitchen space in Rumiola, hired 2 more staff, and expanded her partnership with Obina's venues to cover 3 locations instead of 1. The blog that had once run a small feature on her called again, this time for a full cover story. She agreed. The photograph they used showed her standing in her own kitchen, entirely at ease in a space she had built with her own hands, 1:04 a.m., morning at a time. Her mother kept a printed copy of that feature and showed it, with a pride she never quite managed to make look casual, to anyone who asked after her daughter at the market. "She is doing well," she would say. "She is doing exactly what she came here to do." There is a saying that what a person builds with their own hands, they have truly built, that what is given can be taken away, but what is earned through your own labor and your own refusal to be diminished belongs to you in a way no lie, no well-dressed cruelty can ever reach. Ifeoma did not become remarkable because she suffered. She became remarkable because she refused again and again to let the suffering write the last line of her story. If this story stayed with you, if you know someone who poured themselves into another person's season and was left behind once the harvest finally came, send it their way. Sometimes the kindest thing we can tell someone is that the people who walk away from faithful love are not walking toward anything better. They are simply walking. Until next time, keep your roots honest and your hands open.